If you have that tailwind from the markets of the kind we've had over the past 10 years, 4% looks crazily conservative.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Personal Investor Podcast. I'm Ed Monk, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Richard Evans, to talk about how to build a salary for yourself in retirement. It is an absolutely fundamental question and probably the reason that many of us save and invest in the first place, to help us live without the need to earn money through work. Before we get into the details, let me remind you that if you find this video useful or interesting, to please subscribe to the channel. Give us a like, join the discussion in the comments if you'd like to do that. It really does help others find what we're doing here, and it means that you'll get new content as it is released. Richard, welcome along. How are you?
Hello, Ed. Very well, thank you.
Good. Now, Rich, you have written the book on the topic of generating a retirement salary for yourself. Literally, you've written the book. In 2019, you and another colleague from journalism, a colleague of mine as well, actually, Richard Dyson, wrote Your Retirement Salary, a book aimed at helping people meet this exact challenge. Why don't we start with why you saw the need back in 2019 for a book like that?
I think the biggest factor was the arrival of the pension freedoms a few years before that. So this is when the requirement to buy an annuity with your retirement savings was scrapped.
Yes.
And people then had the option to keep their money invested in retirement and use it as their source of income.
Yeah. And this was a great kind of opening up, wasn't it, of the options? You know, suddenly there was a kind of menu of different ways in which people could use a pot of savings on the one hand to generate income on the other. And as well as all that freedom, it was suddenly a lot more choice and a lot more potential confusion as well. Absolutely.
The thing about annuities, which had become completely uncompetitive, they are simple. So you swap your money you buy an annuity with that money, it provides an income, that's it.
Yes.
Suddenly, if you don't buy an annuity, and nobody wanted to buy an annuity at that time, yes, you have the freedom to keep hold of all the money you've saved during your working life and do whatever you want with it. And famously, that was possibly using it to buy a Lamborghini.
Yes. This is what the government said. They didn't mind if people were to do that.
Yes. But of course, in the real world, most of us had relatively modest sums of money with which to generate an income, and you used it for that purpose to replace the annuity. But you had infinite choice about how to do that.
Indeed. And that's what I really wanted to get into today with this conversation. We're going to go through all the potential ways in which you can use savings on the one hand to create income on the other hand, and talk about ways of blending them, because that's an important part of this mix as well. You've already mentioned annuities. So let's start with them, shall we? I always think they sound very old-fashioned, out of a sort of Jane Austen novel or something. What do annuities offer retirees?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So when the pension freedoms were announced, they were pitched or described as sort of consigning annuities to history, because you no longer were compelled to buy them, and most people immediately took the opportunity not to buy them. Of course, that was partly because they had become terrible value.
Yes.
That's now changed. So they've now become a reasonable source of income again as interest rates have risen. Annuity rates are tied to interest rates. So they've come back into fashion, or at least they're a viable option again.
Yeah, and at a more basic level, an annuity is taking your money and turning it into an income. You're giving that money away, aren't you, to get that income?
You hand over your pension savings to an insurance company, and in return, it pays you an income for life. Okay.
Now, at various points in this conversation, we're going to talk about the returns from these different methods of producing income. With annuities, you get an annuity rate, don't you?
You do.
So this will change all the time, but what sort of return can people expect on annuities, and what does that return depend upon?
Yes. So if you want a very rough figure at the beginning, let's say it starts at 5% from an annuity. And if you retire at a reasonably normal age, but it can be 6 or higher according to various things. So what does your annuity rate depend on? First of all, your age.
Yeah. And the logic there being the older you are, the fewer years the insurance company believes you'll have to live. And therefore, in a competitive market at least, it's prepared to give you a higher rate to get your money.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. You get more each year to compensate for the fact that there are fewer years left of your life on average. Yeah. So yes, number 1, your age. Number 2, your state of health.
For similar reasons.
Yes. Yeah. The insurance company makes a judgment about how long you're likely to live. So that it will still make a profit after it's taken your money and paid it back to you.
And one of the few occasions when being in poor health maybe is, at least financially, to your advantage.
Indeed. It's the opposite of sort of pretending you don't smoke when you buy life insurance.
Yes.
This time, do tell them that you smoke and all your other lifestyle and health conditions, and every little sort of shortcoming in your health will contribute to a higher annuity rate.
Yes.
But that's not the end of the story. As I said before, annuity rates also depend to some extent on the financial markets. So that's the government bond market in particular, which is very much in the news at the moment. Again, bad news for the government if the cost of borrowing goes up, but good news for people who buy an annuity. So the higher that rate goes, the more you're likely to get in exchange for your pension savings each year if you buy an annuity. Okay,
and you mentioned at the start the pension freedoms. That was absolutely the norm, wasn't it? For many, many years, that's what people, that was the solution they reached for when it came to generating income. Annuities were kind of ubiquitous.
Well, they were forced to.
Yes.
Unless you were particularly well off, if you had a pension pot of a certain size, pretty big, you had no choice.
Yeah.
You had to use those pension savings to buy an annuity. And if it was annuity rates where rates weren't very good, tough luck.
Now, the great advantage of annuities, having given them a slightly hard time there, is to say that income is guaranteed. And that, in the world of retirement income, is a very, very valuable thing, isn't it? That guarantee that it will still be sort of coming, rain or shine, but also potentially that it rises if you choose to arrange your annuity that way.
Yes, indeed. And this is another thing that affects your annuity rate. So you can choose to have it to go up every year, either by a certain amount or in line with inflation. That's incredibly valuable and as close as you can get to a retirement salary.
Yeah.
You know, when we're working, we expect our earnings to go up broadly speaking with inflation. Nobody would take a job if the employer said, "Well, I'm sorry, your wage is $10,000 a year and it's never going to go up." That's what you're opting for if you buy a fixed annuity.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the next option for now, and that involves keeping your money and investing it. Let's talk about income drawdown. There's more nuance actually as to
Indeed, yeah.
Ways in which you can generate income from investments. But income drawdown, what is it? What are the principles at play?
So this is the alternative to buying an annuity. You keep your money, all that money you saved up during your working life. It remains yours. It remains under your control. And potentially, if there's any of it left when you die, it's yours to pass on to your heirs. While you're still alive, you need to use it to generate your retirement income instead of the annuity you would once have bought. And there are many, many ways to do that. Many things to take into consideration. So you need to consider the things that previously the annuity company would have considered. How long are you likely to live? What are financial markets likely to do, and so on. It's a very, very difficult thing to do.
Yes, and it's interesting you put it in that way of you're taking on some of those risks actually that the insurance company would normally take on when they were providing an annuity. It's quite a useful lens through which to look at this, I would say, because it's sort of it's more responsibility, more risk on the one hand, potentially better outcomes, more advantageous financial outcomes.
Precisely. That's precisely it. You've got this freedom. You've got a lot of choices. You've got decisions to make. So do it right. and you could do very well and have a good income that goes up during your working life, maybe have plenty left over to leave to your heirs, but get it wrong and you might not have enough money in retirement, and you may have nothing to leave to your heirs. So it's where the reward is going to come from careful planning, careful thoughts, and educating yourself about the options available.
Yeah, and we spoke in when we were talking about annuities about the rate of return that they pay, 5%, maybe higher, depending on circumstances. A lot of people will hear that and say, well, do you know what? I fancy myself to get that kind of long-term return from investments. That would be my expectation. And so therefore, drawdown seems very attractive. But it's worth saying, isn't it, that the kind of the risks change somewhat when you're withdrawing money from a pot. It kind of changes the equation, doesn't it, in terms of how you should approach risk?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, there are different risks to bear in mind. The first one, we can call it a risk, is it's a good risk, but you might live longer than average or than you expected. And I believe stats tend to suggest that people do indeed live longer than they expected.
Yeah.
So that's the first, let's call it a risk. The second risk is what the market's going to do. So you keep that money invested, perhaps in the stock market, perhaps some in the bond market, but it's the markets. And of course, we never know what they're going to do. And the third risk is inflation.
Indeed. And so all these things come together. You've got to make a decision on, well, amongst other things, where you invest the money, but also how much of that money you're going to take each year. Now, an awful lot of ink has been spilt, hasn't it? Working out this problem, not just in your book either. Give us a sort of like overview of those kind of decisions. We've spoken about a 5% annuity rate as an example. Where does the income from drawdown stack up?
Yes, and by the way, when I spoke of a 5% annuity rate, that was an index-linked one.
Yes, it can be higher if you don't do that. Yes,
indeed, for someone roughly at retirement age, and in good health. So, drawdown, how much do you take? That's
it's up to you, right?
It is absolutely up to you, and you could take it all out and buy that Lamborghini, or you could take nothing out and leave it there for your heirs. But most people are going to want to use it for its intended purpose, provide your income in retirement. And if we start sort of at the simplest level, you could take 4% a year, or 4% in your first year, and increase it in line with inflation. And that is the famous 4% rule. Yeah,
indeed. And this is the figure that has a lot of research behind it, a lot of historical number crunching that's gone on to show that in the vast majority of circumstances, taking that 4% at the start, uprating that with inflation each year, that's very, very likely to last you at least 30 years. That's the kind of the sort of lab conditions that it's been tested to.
Indeed. Right? It was tested by the person who invented it all the way back to basically 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. So every year since, what would have happened if you'd had the worst possible luck investing just before the stock market crash and inflation and so on. And so all those potential bad things that could have happened to you into your retirement, if you'd stuck to that 4% rule, even in those bad circumstances, you still wouldn't have run out of money.
Yes. So that's very cautious. Let's put it that way.
Precisely.
That's very cautious. It's taking account for all of history's worst case scenarios.
Precisely.
If you're terribly unlucky, you're going to walk into one of those when you retire. But the chances are you won't.
Yes.
So this is the thing that people need to get their head around about drawdown. We can talk about withdrawal rates. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be right for you or appropriate for you. We actually did a lot of analysis earlier this year looking at what's happened in drawdown since that moment you mentioned when the rules opened up and the options opened up about 10 years ago. And frankly, in multiple different varying scenarios, drawdown proved to be highly advantageous versus an option like annuities. And not only could you have taken your 4%, you could have taken 5, 6 or 7%.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
You could have done all of that and you'd still be left with more money now today than you had at the start.
Yes.
Because, of course, markets have performed very well in that time. Just a one-off scenario, probably won't be repeated in exactly the same way again. but that's an illustration of the trade-off when it comes to drawdown. You can have a much better outcome if markets go your way.
Indeed, yes. And this is one of the things we just don't know at the beginning. What market's going to do. If you have that tailwind from the markets of the kind we've had over the past 10 years, 4% looks crazily conservative.
Yeah, indeed. And we're talking about drawdown here. It could be suitable for lots of people, but they need to understand, I suppose, that a lot of the decision making is going to now fall on them. We've mentioned some of them, haven't really gone into the where you invest your money. That's another consideration. You have to have some wherewithal that you're going to want to take on those decisions, or at least consult someone to help you with those decisions.
Yes. As we said before, you've got so much choice. You could just keep things simple and, let's say, put 60% of the money in the stock market via a tracker fund. Mm-hmm. And perhaps 60% in bonds. And again, you can buy a bond fund. That would keep it. You can buy a bond tracker fund even if you want to. Yeah. That would be at the simplest end. Follow the 4% rule, let's say, maybe make it 4.5% just to reflect how conservative it is. And even the inventor of the rule has said that probably you can get closer to 5%.
Yeah, he's revised it upwards, right? In the last
yes, he sort of tweaked
years.
Some of his assumptions and the way you invest.
Yeah.
And got it closer to 5%. So you could probably do, let's say, 4.5%, 4.75%, that kind of thing.
And a lot of people, when they're thinking about their drawdown income, you could invest in a way that generates lots of income.
Indeed.
Dividend paying shares would be one way of doing that. Bonds which pay an interest would be a way of doing that.
Yes.
Other people will say, well, do you know what? I'm going to go into assets that grow the most, or I'm going to take those dividends and reinvest them. And then I'm just going to, at certain sort of, a certain frequency, I'm going to sell down assets. And that's where I'm going to generate my income from. That's another consideration and different sort of approaches that you can take.
Yes. I suppose the most intuitive thing would be to buy income producing assets, funds, perhaps shares, and the stock market yields something over 3% at the moment. Mm-hmm. So that would be a start. Or you could say, I prefer to go for growth. Yeah. And I'm just going to sell the growth, if you like. Let's assume that on average that my fund goes up by 6 or 7% a year. So I'm just going to take 6 or 7% a year. Nothing wrong with that, but there will be ups and downs.
Is there? I mean, I don't have an answer to this, but is there inherently, a logic to doing it one way or the other? Is one way more cautious, one way less cautious? Is it just a personal preference?
I would say either is okay, but they do require different approaches beyond just that decision about income or growth. So, for instance, if you do take the selling the growth option, let's say, you're going to have years during a retirement that may be 20 or 30 years long when there is no growth.
Yeah.
And when you're so there's no growth to sell, and or years when your investments go down. So what do you do in those years? Well, the key thing to do is to stop selling.
Yes.
When your assets fall, because you'll have to sell more of them to generate the income you need. And again, if you've planned, there's no reason why that should be a problem. What you do is you set cash aside.
Yes, I wanted to talk about this. Yes.
The cash buffer, it's often called. So if the market falls, stop selling your assets to generate your income and instead take it from the cash buffer. Wait for markets to recover. They pretty much always do, always have. And then you can start selling your assets again, replenish your cash buffer perhaps. Yeah. If you can, you should really.
And so that's really speaking to the fact that you need to have investments within a kind of wider organization of your finances with cash, that maybe different pots of investments, even maybe income producing ones, maybe growth ones. And you need to kind of have them all in some sort of balance. I wanted to touch on tax. Deep waters, there's
endless
lots you could say. Yeah, lots you could say. What we'll just say, I suppose, is that it makes sense to be as tax efficient as you can. That's true when you're saving your money and growing your money and contributing to long-term investments, but also when you're withdrawing them as well. We don't need to go over every rule here, but it can make a big difference, right?
It absolutely can. The very complexity of the tax system can almost be to your advantage, because you have various pools of money that you can call on, and you can coordinate the withdrawals in a way that minimizes your tax bill. So you can't go into detail, and every person's circumstances are going to be different, but just consider the fact that you have, first of all, 25% of your pension that you can take tax-free, and you can stagger those tax-free withdrawals over the life of your retirement if you want.
Yes.
You also have probably some money in ISAs. And you also have your personal allowance, your tax-free personal allowance. So what you can do is bear those three things in mind to maximize the amount you take while minimizing the tax. So for instance, you might say, I'll take my taxable withdrawals from my pension up to the higher rate tax threshold.
Yes.
And then top up that income from my ISAs, or perhaps from the tax-free cash if you do decide to take it regularly rather than in one go.
Yeah. And presumably a consideration there might be, well, what if my income requirements decrease as I get older, and as I get into kind of very old age, maybe I don't need those higher amounts to live from day to day. And so actually I'm happy to take taxable income at the end because there's less of it to be taxed, and you want to use some of that tax-free stuff at the start.
Absolutely. And of course, we started with the pension freedoms, and you have this freedom not only about how to invest, but about how to structure your withdrawals, how much to take, how to take it. And all of that is to your benefit if you're prepared to do the planning and do the monitoring and the work involved, unfortunately. But it can be to your benefit.
Yeah, and just one final word on all of that then. It does take planning, and it does take a sort of understanding of the variables and of the risks you're running.
You have to go into it with your eyes open.
With your eyes open, and presumably as well a degree of flexibility to course correct as you move through retirement.
Absolutely. If things go badly, inflation. Or well. So start with the bad, and I'll come on to the well. So if things go badly, inflation hits, maybe the markets fall at the same time. That's a terrible combination.
Yeah.
You may have to think about tightening your belt a bit, at least for a number of years.
Yeah.
In such bad circumstances. Equally, and you touched on it earlier, that drawdown has been very good over the past 10 years. You might find that you can just take more safely than you expected.
Yeah.
And don't feel that you have to be too cautious. And
no, and also I think it would be useful for people to understand that, we know people in the business. We are in the business. We are very familiar with all these issues. You get to that actual point where you've actually got to make these decisions for yourself. It's slightly brain scrambling, and really understanding what to do in the face of all those uncertainties is really, really difficult. And if people just want to make things easier for themselves and to go for certainty, nothing wrong with that.
No, and there are two ways perhaps to have, certainty or greater certainty. The annuity is always there as a backup.
Yeah.
So you could always get to the point, you go into drawdown to start with.
That's right.
And then as perhaps you get older and you become less inclined to look after your investments, you can just switch to an annuity with your remaining pot. And of course, you'll get a higher rate. You may have used up some of your pot, but you'll get a higher rate because you've got fewer years left to live. And the other option, of course, is to get some advice.
Indeed.
Just go to a regulated financial advisor who will help you navigate these various things. And of course, the other thing with an annuity, which we didn't mention earlier, is that you can always mix and match.
Yeah.
Use half your pot, perhaps.
Lots of people will do this. Yeah. But particularly to secure the income they need for the real essentials of life.
Absolutely.
To keep you, at a very, very minimum baseline level of income.
Absolutely.
annuitize that. That's completely safe. And actually, that's a great aid in your investments. Then you can relax a bit more about
Absolutely.
them. You can let them fluctuate, and you can be a bit more certain that you're not going to be suddenly destitute because markets have turned against you.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have covered absolutely loads there, Rich. So we'll leave it there. I will just remind you all that if you found this interesting or useful, to please subscribe to the channel. It does mean that you're going to get updated content as soon as it is released. Give us a like, share the episodes. It helps people find what we're doing here. That all said, Richard, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Ed.